Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. On a chilly Tuesday evening, I sat down in my favorite spot on the worn leather couch, ready to relax after a long day at work. The house was quiet, the kids were at a sleepover, so it was just me and my wife, Emma. She had been distant recently, spending more time with her friends, always on her phone, laughing at texts she'd never share with me. I'd chalked it up to stress from work or maybe just a phase. We all go through them, I thought. I barely heard her footsteps when she entered the room. She stood there for a moment, looking around as if deciding something important, and then sat across from me. Her eyes sparkled with a strange light, a mixture of guilt and excitement. I could tell she had something to say, but I wasn't prepared for the words that would follow. "James," she began, her voice soft, almost too gentle, as though she was afraid of how I'd react. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about us, about our relationship." Her hands were clasped tightly together, and I noticed her thumb pressing into her wedding ring, twisting it unconsciously. I leaned forward, trying to read her expression, bracing myself. "Go on," I said, keeping my voice calm. A sense of dread crept over me, one I couldn't quite name but felt deeply. "I love you, and I want you to know that," she said, her gaze unwavering, as though rehearsed. "But I think we should consider opening up our marriage." The words hung in the air, bizarrely out of place in the quiet comfort of our living room. I blinked, trying to process. I'd read about things like this in some modern relationship articles, heard of couples who ventured into this kind of territory. But Emma and me? This wasn't some hypothetical scenario I'd tossed around in my mind, this was my wife, talking about our marriage, the foundation of our life together. "Where is this coming from?" I asked, managing to keep my voice steady, though I felt anything but calm inside. My heart hammered, and I could feel the muscles in my neck tighten. She hesitated for a moment before responding, choosing her words carefully. "It's not you, James. It's. I feel like I need to explore, to understand myself in a deeper way." She leaned forward, her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before, an unsettling thrill mixed with the kind of conviction that comes when a person has already made up their mind. "Mary's been doing it with her husband, and it's made them closer. She says it's about embracing love, experiencing life fully." "Mary?" I asked, feeling the name like a splinter beneath my skin. Mary was Emma's best friend, a woman with a loud personality and a string of failed relationships in her past. I couldn't believe Emma would listen to her advice on something this crucial. Mary's life was a tangled mess of drama, impulsive decisions, and self-justifying explanations, and now she was feeding my wife this empowered nonsense. "Yes, Mary," Emma continued, oblivious to the disbelief on my face. "She's inspired me to see love differently. To understand that love can mean freedom, James, not chains. And don't you want that too? Freedom?" I repeated, the word sour on my tongue. "We have a life, a marriage. Freedom, that was a choice we gave up when we made these commitments." She looked at me, her expression tinged with a strange pity. "Maybe love doesn't have to be so rigid. Maybe it can be more than this." She gestured around, as if our life together was something confining. "I just want a little time to explore, to see who I am without hurting us. And then we can come back stronger, more complete." She added it like an afterthought, "Trust me, you'll see," as though the destruction of a marriage could result in its rebirth, as if nothing about this idea could be anything but devastating. A suffocating silence fell between us. I didn't trust myself to respond. I got up, ran my hand over my face, and walked to the window, staring out into the darkness. Her words reverberated, each one slicing deeper as they settled into my mind. "I need you to understand, James," she said, her voice pleading, softer now. "It's not because I don't love you. It's because I want to keep loving you. This is for us. For us." Those words sounded hollow. How could she think this was for us? My mind flashed through every memory, every moment we'd shared, all the small and large sacrifices, the dreams we built together, only to have her stand here and say she needed to explore, to come back to me, to our life, somehow renewed. Who is he? The words slipped out before I could stop them, cutting through the air like a challenge. She flinched, her cheeks coloring. There isn't anyone. Not yet, she said, but her eyes darted away, betraying her. There was someone, or at least, there would be soon. Her hesitation, her coy choice of words, it all pointed to the truth she wasn't ready to admit. She didn't need freedom. She wanted permission. I turned back to her, a slow anger rising, but I forced myself to stay calm. You've already made up your mind, haven't you? You're not asking me. You're telling me what you're going to do. Her silence was answer enough. James, please, you'll understand one day. You'll see that this is right for both of us. She reached out as if to touch my arm, but I pulled back, the anger starting to boil over. Don't, I said sharply. Don't pretend this is anything other than what it is. Her face fell, and I saw for the first time a flash of regret, perhaps even shame. But it didn't last long. She stood, composed herself, and gave a small, tight smile as if she had resigned herself to the fallout. It doesn't have to be like this, James. You could support me in this. Support you? I shook my head. You're kidding yourself, Emma. This isn't some life-affirming journey, it's betrayal. Plain and simple. She pursed her lips, her face hardening, and she turned to leave. Her steps were measured, controlled, and when she reached the doorway, she looked back once, her eyes filled with a strange, almost sad detachment. I'll be staying with Mary tonight, she said, and with that, she was gone, leaving a hollow silence in her wake. I stood there, numb, as the minutes dragged on. Eventually, I wandered through the house, moving from room to room, tracing my fingers over the small mementos of our life together, family photos, souvenirs from our travels, tokens of love given and received over the years. Each one a reminder of what we had, of what we'd built together. But as I wandered, another feeling began to stir beneath the numbness. It was a fierce determination, a clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. Emma might have wanted her freedom, but she'd also made her choice. And I knew, with a sudden certainty, that I'd make mine. In the following days, while Emma acted on her journey of self-discovery, I started my own, though in a different direction. I reached out to a lawyer, drafted an agreement, gathered evidence, and made copies of every incriminating message, every plan she'd scribbled in her notebook. I was no longer willing to be a passive observer in the unraveling of my marriage. If she wanted to throw away what we had, I'd make sure I didn't leave empty-handed. I felt no need for confrontation, no desire for shouting matches or accusations. I'd let her go, but I would do it on my terms. She thought this was about freedom, about finding herself. But in truth, it was about abandoning everything we'd built. So, I made plans, set my resolve, and waited. The irony wasn't lost on me that she expected to return from this escapade as if nothing had happened, as though our marriage would simply pick up from where it left off. But I was already well ahead of her, ready to set her free, yes, but in a way she'd never seen coming. The days following Emma's declaration felt like walking through fog. Each moment felt surreal, as if I were floating in someone else's life, watching from the outside. I moved through the motions at work, nodded at conversations, signed documents, yet all the while, her words played on repeat in my mind, "This is for us," and, worse, her chilling final words before leaving, "I'll be staying with Mary tonight." For the first time since college, I truly felt alone. Emma's presence was everywhere, in the scent of her perfume clinging to our bedroom sheets, in the notes she used to leave on the bathroom mirror, now replaced with a harsh silence. She hadn't bothered to reach out since she left, and I hadn't either. As each day passed, my anger simmered, a dark current beneath the surface. I was done feeling like a bystander in my own life. If she wanted to throw away the foundation of our marriage, I'd make sure she saw the full weight of that choice. That Friday, I sat in the dimly lit office of a lawyer I'd found through a friend. She was efficient, sharp-eyed, and didn't waste time with pleasantries. "So, Mr. Harlow," she said, adjusting her glasses as she glanced over the notes I'd given her. "You're looking to protect yourself in the event of divorce." "That's right," I replied, struggling to keep my tone neutral. "Emma, my wife, she wants to open up our marriage." I could barely say the words, as if acknowledging them out loud might make them more real. "She's been spending nights away. There's someone else, though she won't admit it directly." The lawyer nodded, her expression non-judgmental but focused. "In my experience, these situations don't end well for the one who's left in the dark. I'd advise you to prepare for the worst." She paused, her pen tapping against her notepad. "Have you started gathering evidence?" I nodded. "I have access to her phone records, and I've gone through our emails and messages. It's all there, the conversations, the plans. Enough to show there's something going on." "Good." She leaned back, appraising me with a look that made me feel both comforted and vulnerable. "We'll need every piece of documentation you can get your hands on. Financial records, joint accounts, any debts, everything. It'll give you a clearer path forward if things escalate." When I left her office, I felt lighter, as though I'd finally taken the first step toward reclaiming control. My next stop was the bank. Emma and I had a joint account, one I'd dutifully contributed to each month. I wasn't about to watch it drain away as she indulged in her freedom. The bank manager was kind and professional, and I moved a substantial portion of our savings into an account under my name. It wasn't a full extraction, just enough to protect myself, a safeguard against the inevitable storm I sensed brewing. There was no telling what else she might do, and I wasn't about to leave everything at risk. When I got home that evening, the house was eerily silent, the kind of silence that follows an argument where too much was left unsaid. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, settling down in the kitchen, waiting for her to come back. A part of me, the one that still remembered the woman I'd married, thought she'd come home with apologies, ready to talk things out. But I knew better. The damage was already done. Around midnight, I heard her key turn in the lock. She entered quietly, like a thief. I could see her silhouette in the dim hallway light, and when she saw me sitting there, she paused, momentarily startled. "Oh," she said, almost guiltily. "I didn't expect you to be awake." "Clearly," I replied, setting down my glass and fixing her with a steady gaze. "Care to tell me where you were?" Her face twisted into something like exasperation, as if I were intruding on her personal time. "I told you, I was with Mary. We went out, caught up." "It's not a crime, James." I clenched my jaw, feeling my control slipping. "Emma, I know you're not with Mary. Or at least, not only with her." Her face hardened. "So, you're spying on me now? Is that where we're at, James?" "No," I replied, my voice icy. "We're at a point where you decided our marriage wasn't enough. Where you didn't even ask, just announced what you planned to do and expected me to accept it." She looked away, her jaw tightening. "It's not like that. I need this, James. I thought you'd try to understand. I thought we could get through this." "Get through this?" I repeated, letting out a mirthless laugh. "You can't get through something that's already broken. And you broke it, Emma." She stared at me, her gaze flickering with a mixture of defiance and shame. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "Well, you did," I replied bluntly. "And I'm not here to wait for you to find yourself at my expense. I deserve better than that." Her face softened, but I wasn't falling for the flicker of remorse I saw there. I knew her well enough to understand this was a knee-jerk reaction to being confronted, nothing more. The silence stretched between us, an unbridgeable gulf that neither of us tried to cross. Finally, she straightened, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I can't stop you from feeling the way you do," she said softly. "But I still think this will help us in the long run." "Emma," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "you're delusional if you think we're coming back from this." She swallowed hard, her eyes meeting mine for the briefest moment before she turned away. Without another word, she walked up the stairs, leaving me alone in the dark, with only the sound of her retreating footsteps echoing in my ears. In the days that followed, she continued with her newfound routine, staying out late, making half-hearted excuses that grew thinner with every repetition. I, in turn, grew colder, more calculated. I focused on the practicalities, piecing together the documentation my lawyer needed, drawing a careful blueprint of the next phase in my life without her. One afternoon, I stopped by her workplace to drop off a box of her favorite snacks, a harmless gesture that would give me an excuse to get a sense of her surroundings. Her office was on the 5th floor of a downtown high-rise, and as I made my way through the corridors, I saw her chatting with a colleague near her cubicle. He was younger, sharp-dressed, laughing at something she'd said, and she looked back at him with an openness, a flirtatiousness, I hadn't seen in years. When she noticed me, her smile faltered. The colleague quickly excused himself, and she approached, the expression on her face carefully blank. "James, what are you doing here?" she asked, her tone almost accusatory. "Just thought I'd bring you something." I held up the box, letting my eyes linger on her, daring her to dismiss me. She took the box with a forced smile. "Thank you," she said, but her eyes flicked nervously toward the direction her colleague had taken. "You didn't have to come all this way." "Guess I felt like doing something unexpected," I replied, keeping my tone light. "You've been doing a lot of that lately, haven't you?" Her jaw tightened, but she kept her composure, offering a tight-lipped smile. "I'll see you at home," she said in a clipped tone, turning back to her desk without another word. I left the office feeling something sharp and satisfying, a small victory in this twisted game she'd started. She might have convinced herself this was her way to happiness, but I wasn't the passive, clueless husband she thought I was. I was watching, learning, and preparing. Each day I felt myself becoming someone different, someone detached, as if the hurt she'd inflicted had forced a part of me to grow calloused, wary, and cold. I still remembered the way she'd laughed when we first met, how her eyes would crinkle at the edges, how she used to look at me with such unfiltered joy. I wanted to hate her, but the memories made it complicated, like hating something beautiful because it had cut you. The culmination of my resolve came late one night, around 2 in the morning, when I received a call from an unknown number. I answered groggily, not expecting much, but my drowsiness disappeared as a quiet, unfamiliar voice spoke on the other end. "Mr. Harlow?" the voice asked, hesitant. "Yes, this is James," I replied, wary. I think you need to know," she said, her voice trembling. "About Emma. And Matt. They're not who you think they are. I've seen what they're doing. I thought you should know." The line went dead, leaving me clutching the phone, my heart pounding. I didn't know who the woman was, but her words gave shape to what I'd known all along. Emma wasn't just on a journey of self-discovery, she was living a double life, and I was the obstacle she hoped to ignore until it suited her. I set the phone down, my decision made. She had her freedom, and now I'd take mine. In a way she'd never anticipate. It was no longer just about saving myself from her betrayal. It was about reclaiming my life, even if it meant walking away from everything we once had. The call haunted me, each word twisting deeper into my mind like a nail, the proof I needed yet dreaded to hear. I didn't know the voice, but I felt her desperation, her strange empathy. She knew Emma and her lover, Matt. I wondered what role she played in their lives, and why she cared enough to call. But I didn't have time to dwell on that. The only thing that mattered was the truth she had confirmed. After a sleepless night, I drove to Emma's workplace. I needed to see this Matt, to put a face to the man who thought he could tear apart my life. As I entered the lobby, the receptionist greeted me with a polite nod. "Can I help you, sir?" "Yes, I'm here to see Emma Harlow," I replied, keeping my tone friendly, calm. "She's expecting me." The receptionist glanced at her computer, nodding. "She's on the 5th floor. You can take the elevator on the right." The ride up felt like eternity, and I braced myself for what I might find. It was just past noon, and the office was bustling. I spotted Emma near her desk, talking animatedly with Matt, a tall, fit man with slick back hair and the kind of self-assured smile that made my stomach turn. They were too close, their laughter too familiar. I watched as she leaned in, her hand brushing his arm, and for a moment, I felt rooted to the spot, unable to move. I took a deep breath and approached them, the world narrowing to this one moment. When Emma saw me, her smile froze, and her face paled. Matt, oblivious to the tension, looked between us with mild curiosity. "James?" Emma stammered, taking a small step back. What are you doing here?" "Hello, Emma," I said, my voice steady, though I felt anything but calm inside. "I thought I'd drop by and surprise you. And it seems I'm in luck," I added, glancing at Matt. "This must be the famous Matt you've been working so closely with." Emma's eyes widened in panic, and Matt shifted uncomfortably, finally catching on to the tension. "Yes," Emma said quickly, forcing a smile, "this is Matt. We worked together on several projects." Her tone was clipped, her eyes darting between us, calculating her next move. Matt offered a hesitant handshake. "Nice to meet you, James." I accepted it, squeezing a bit harder than necessary. "I've heard so much about you," I said, forcing a smile. "I suppose you could say I'm here on a fact-finding mission." Emma laughed nervously, cutting in. "James, I'm a little busy right now. Why don't I meet you for lunch in a bit?" But I wasn't letting her off that easily. "Actually, I think we should talk now," I said, my gaze locked on hers. "It's long overdue." Emma's face tightened, but she nodded, clearly resigned. She turned to Matt, giving him a quick smile that almost made me flinch. "I'll catch up with you later, Matt." Without waiting for her response, I led her to an empty conference room down the hall. Once the door closed behind us, the silence was thick and charged. She leaned against the table, crossing her arms defensively, her expression wary. "What are you doing, James?" she demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Coming here like this, making a scene." "A scene?" I repeated, feeling my anger surge. "Emma, I'm done playing the fool. I know about you and Matt. I know about your so-called freedom plans. And now, I'm here to make something clear to you." She went pale, her mask cracking, and for a moment, her gaze dropped. "James." "Don't bother lying," I cut her off, my tone cold. "You made your choice. You walked away from us. You betrayed everything we built together. I just want to know why." Emma's face softened slightly, and she sighed, her shoulders slumping. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she murmured, almost to herself. I thought you'd understand that I needed something different. Something more." "More?" I scoffed, incredulous. "More than a husband who loved you? More than a life we built together? What exactly were you missing, Emma? Because whatever it was, you should have had the decency to leave before seeking it somewhere else." Tears filled her eyes, and she looked away, biting her lip. "You were always so predictable, James," she whispered, almost sadly. I felt suffocated. Like I was living someone else's life. I needed to feel alive again, and Matt, he made me feel that. I stared at her, feeling a wave of anger and sadness that left me breathless. "Alive?" I echoed, shaking my head. "You threw everything away for a fling with a man who can't even look me in the eye? That's what you call alive?" Her face contorted with guilt, but she didn't respond. She knew there was no excuse that would make this right. I let out a bitter laugh, the absurdity of it all hitting me. Well, congratulations, Emma. You got your freedom. And you've lost your husband. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. James, no, don't do this. We can still fix it. I'll stop seeing him, I promise. We can go to counseling, work through this. I shook my head, feeling a sad resolve settle over me. It's too late, Emma. You made your choice the moment you betrayed me. I'm not going to fight for someone who doesn't want to be here. For a moment, she looked like she might argue, like she'd try to win me back with promises she couldn't keep. But then her shoulders slumped, and she looked away, defeated. You'll regret this, James, she whispered. You're throwing away everything we have over a mistake. A mistake? I echoed, barely able to contain my anger. A mistake is a forgotten anniversary or a missed dinner. What you did was a choice, Emma. A choice that destroyed everything. The silence that followed was heavy, the finality of my words settling between us. Without another word, I turned and left, leaving her alone in that empty conference room. As I walked away, I felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. The weight I'd been carrying for so long had finally lifted, and though the pain was still raw, I knew I'd made the right decision. I left her office and drove home, the gravity of my decision pressing down on me with each mile. By the time I reached the house, I felt hollow, drained. I poured myself another drink, sitting in the dark, replaying the confrontation in my mind. The next morning, I contacted my lawyer again, asking her to proceed with the divorce. I wanted a clean break, no drawn-out battles or pleas for reconciliation. Emma's betrayal had already taken enough from me, and I wasn't about to let it drag on any longer. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the logistics of the separation. I notified friends and family, some of whom expressed shock, others who had perhaps seen the cracks in our marriage long before I had. My lawyer filed the paperwork, and soon, Emma received the official notification. She tried calling me several times, leaving messages laced with regret, begging for a chance to explain. But I was done listening to her lies. My evenings were spent in silence, the house echoing with memories of a life that now felt like a distant dream. I found solace in the quiet, learning to live with myself again, to find a way forward that didn't rely on the broken promises Emma had left behind. One evening, as I was packing up some of her things to send to her new apartment, my phone rang. The same unfamiliar number from that night. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but then curiosity got the better of me. Hello? Mr. Harlow? It was the same woman's voice, trembling slightly. Yes, this is James, I replied, my pulse quickening. Who is this? There was a pause before she spoke. I'm Amanda. I work with Emma. I was the one who called you before, about her and Matt. I clenched my jaw, memories of that night flashing through my mind. Why are you calling me, Amanda? I wanted to apologize, she stammered. I didn't know how else to tell you, but I couldn't stand to see it happening. I knew it wasn't right. Why did you do it? I asked, a hint of curiosity mingling with my frustration. There was another pause, and I could hear the regret in her voice when she spoke. Because I saw what they were doing to you, and it felt wrong. I couldn't sit back and let it happen. I let her words sink in, feeling a strange gratitude for this stranger who'd been brave enough to tell me the truth, even when it wasn't hers to tell. Thank you, Amanda, I said quietly. You saved me from a lot of pain. She breathed a sigh of relief. I'm glad I could help. I wish it had turned out differently. After I hung up, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't anticipated. Amanda's call had peeled back the final layer of betrayal, exposing the truth I'd been too blind to see. Emma's choices weren't my failure, and for the first time, I felt at peace with letting her go. The divorce finalized swiftly after that, the last remnants of our life together neatly divided and filed away. Emma and I had a brief, civil meeting to discuss logistics, and though her gaze was filled with remorse, I felt nothing but a quiet acceptance. The chapter had closed. When I returned to my empty house that evening, I poured myself a drink, savoring the bittersweet freedom that now felt like mine. I'd lost the life I once knew, but I'd gained something invaluable in return, my own strength, my own peace. And as I sat there, alone but unbroken, I realized that I'd finally come home. Months passed, and life slowly returned to something resembling normalcy. I focused on work, threw myself into projects that kept my mind off Emma, and reconnected with old friends. Week by week, I built a new rhythm, a life unburdened by the chaos she'd left behind. I was learning to live with myself again, to appreciate the peace that came from knowing I'd taken control of my future. One Friday evening, as I sat on my porch nursing a drink, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something urged me to answer. "Hello? James?" The voice on the other end was soft, familiar. "Yes, this is James." My heart sank as I recognized it. Amanda, the woman who had called months ago to tell me about Emma's affair. Since then, I hadn't heard from her, hadn't expected to. That call had been enough to break the final thread holding my marriage together. "I know it's unexpected for me to call," she said hesitantly. "But I found something that I thought you'd want to see." "What are you talking about?" I asked, both intrigued and wary. "It's about Emma and Matt. I think you deserve to know the full story." The last thing I wanted was to be dragged back into that mess. But something in Amanda's tone made me pause, the kind of tone that only accompanies secrets hidden for far too long. "Where can we meet?" I finally asked, a mix of reluctance and curiosity stirring within me. We agreed on a small, quiet coffee shop downtown. When I arrived, I spotted her instantly. Amanda was younger than I'd expected, dressed simply, her gaze shadowed with regret and something darker. "Thanks for meeting me," she said softly as I took the seat across from her. She pulled an envelope from her bag, sliding it across the table with a trembling hand. I opened it, finding a stack of photos and printed emails. My heart pounded as I skimmed the contents, each page revealing moments between Emma and Matt that went far beyond the emotional affair I'd imagined. There were photos of them in places I'd never been told about, on trips I'd assumed she'd taken alone or with friends. A sequence of dates lined up with moments she had assured me were work-related, business trips I'd never thought to question. I looked up at Amanda, a strange calm settling over me. "Why are you showing me this now?" She swallowed, her fingers twisting together. "Because, there's more you don't know, James." A chill ran down my spine as she continued. "I didn't just find these," she said. I was there. I was part of it, once." "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She took a shaky breath, guilt flickering across her face. "Emma and I were friends long before she met Matt. She confided in me, told me everything about your marriage, her frustrations, her need for more." She looked away, her voice laced with regret. "At first, I tried to encourage her to work on things with you. But then, she introduced me to Matt." My stomach churned. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you need to know the truth. About Emma, about Matt, and about me." She held my gaze, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. "James, I was part of the affair. Emma pulled me into it." A sickening realization washed over me. "So you're saying?" "Yes," she whispered. "For a while, it was all three of us. Emma, Matt, and me. She didn't just want freedom with him. She wanted everything. I was part of her twisted version of a new life." I clenched my jaw, feeling anger rise within me, more intense than anything I'd felt before. "And why are you here, Amanda? What do you expect me to do with this?" She blinked, her face contorted with shame. "I ended it with them. I couldn't live with myself knowing I'd betrayed you, that I'd taken part in hurting someone who didn't deserve it. I thought I could just walk away, but the guilt has been eating me alive. So you think coming here, confessing this, that it'll make it right?" I could barely contain my disgust. "No," she replied softly, her gaze never wavering. "But I thought you deserved to know the truth, all of it. I wanted you to hear it from me before Emma tried to twist it in her favor." Her words hung heavy in the air. I sat back, the full weight of the betrayal sinking in. Emma's affair with Matt had been bad enough, but the knowledge that Amanda, the woman who'd once exposed Emma's deception, had also been a part of it left me reeling. As I tried to process the tangled web of lies and betrayals, Amanda reached into her bag, pulling out a small, well-worn envelope. "There's one more thing," she said, her voice trembling. "Something I kept, something I think you should have." She slid it across the table. Inside was a handwritten letter from Emma, dated months before everything fell apart. The words on the page were raw, emotional, a confession that revealed her doubts, her longing for something she felt I couldn't provide. She had felt trapped, she wrote, in a marriage she thought had grown stagnant. She claimed she still loved me but needed to find herself, needed to explore who she was beyond being my wife. "I'm sorry, James," Amanda whispered, standing up to leave. "I know you probably hate me, and I deserve it. But I hope someday you can find peace with all of this." I didn't look up as she walked away, leaving me alone with the letter, the photos, and the broken remains of my marriage. Sitting there, I realized that everything I'd thought I understood about my life had been shattered, reconstructed into something twisted and unrecognizable. I took a long, deep breath, letting the anger and betrayal wash over me, leaving me empty. But as I sat alone in that coffee shop, a strange calm settled over me. I had nothing left to lose, nothing left to give to the people who had taken everything from me. And in that moment, I knew that the best revenge, the only true victory, would be to rebuild my life from scratch, not out of spite, but out of a commitment to myself. I stood, leaving the photos and the letter behind on the table. I didn't need them anymore. Let them fade into the past where they belonged. I would walk out of here, away from the wreckage Emma and her twisted affair had left in my life. And as I stepped out into the cool evening air, I felt, for the first time in a long while, a strange and powerful freedom, one born not from the absence of commitment, but from the choice to move forward, unbound by the betrayals that had once held me back.